Hello, we are 1 week away from the Mr. Robot season finale. We are here to discuss the penultimate episode of the season, or rather, part one of the season finale, Python Part 1, which aired on September 14th. It was written and directed by Sam Esmail. No sign of Alf, but signs of Tyrell Wellick at last. I'm not sure which I wanted more, though. So we'll discuss that. I'm here with I'm Daniel Montgomery. I'm here with David Buchanan, Riley Chow, and Tony Ruiz. And we've waited so long, so let's not bury the lead anymore. We have finally seen Tyrell Wellick, and we are reasonably sure that he is not another hallucination. What did you think about that revelation, David?
I was happy to see it finally happen. But at the same time, there seems something distant in Martin Wallstrom's performance this week that I think to help build that kind of suspense of, is it actually him or is it a hallucination? But I don't feel like we've really seen Tyrell yet until we get the Tyrell that we used to know, because it didn't seem like the good old Tyrell in his behavior this week.
Yeah, what did you guys think? What of that reveal at the end?
Yeah, it seemed like even his voice was a bit different.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mentioned before that I worried that they would eventually just pan over and then there he would be lying in a ditch. So that didn't quite happen, but I found this kind of just as anticlimactic. I think that's probably due to not being able to see the second half of the episode as originally intended. It's kind of like suddenly he's there. Elliot might as well have said, like, "Hey, where were you?" And he could have said, "Oh yeah, I was hiding."
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I'm kind of the same way, which is odd considering I've been waiting with bated breath for Wallstrom to come back. But at the same time, maybe I think if this had originally aired the way it was intended as a 2-hour or as a 2-episode finale, I think there'd be fewer questions. I don't know if they structured it this way just to increase the ambiguity leading up to next week's finale. I thought there was just enough ambiguity about whether or not it really is Wellick with the difference in the voice, and there's still the way it was staged in the taxi cab about whether it's really him or because we couldn't tell if the taxi driver really saw him or not. Even though I kind of assumed that it actually was him. But again, I did like the fact that there were those differences, because I immediately noticed, the first thing I noticed, that it didn't sound like him.
Yeah.
And I thought, interesting. It was just another crick in the neck moment, which is exciting, but especially it almost felt anticlimactic after what I felt was, performance-wise, cinematically, almost a really just strong episode. I mean, when Angela's portion of the episode is not anticlimactic, when it actually is one of the best parts of the episode, it's kind of interesting how that ended up working out.
Yeah, I didn't actually mind the Tyrell Wellick anticlimax. I agree, it was kind of an anticlimax, but looking back, it was almost inevitable for it to be anticlimactic. They had made us wait so long, so unless they pulled another rabbit out of the hat, like some huge thing, it's like Tyrell Wellick was secretly Elliot's father's father, and he's seeing three, so some kind of big, dramatic, ridiculous kind of reveal. There was no way it was going to quite live up to the anticipation, at least in terms of seeing him again for the first time. I don't think any of us really believed that what Mr. Robot had said, which was that Elliot had shot him, or if he had shot him, that he had killed him. I don't think any of us believed that. So seeing him again was like, okay, now get on with whatever next week is. Next week I'm expecting to be the climax, and seeing him again is not what I was thinking would be the thing. Seeing the scenes from next week's episode, which seems, honestly, the clips of Tyrell Wellick in the scenes from next week's episodes is more screen time than he has had this entire season put together. So I'm anticipating a lot of, for him to almost, it looked like he's almost a co-lead in next week's part 2. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that is. he's some part of stage 2, which that's not surprising either. It's just a matter of what stage 2 actually is, which I think will be the big climax. And another, we talked about it. Tony mentioned it briefly. The Angela portion of this episode, I'm going to call it the best portion of this episode. It was, when Sam Esmail, who wrote this episode, which isn't surprising because he seems to have written the weirdest ones, and other writers tend to, have done the more narratively kind of straightforward ones. This kind of weird journey that Angela goes through that leads into this strange, empty room where this little girl delivers what I told to Tony, yet last night was the weirdest BuzzFeed quiz ever. It's like, have you ever fantasized about killing your father? Have you ever cried during sex? Is the key in the room? It was so, it felt so David Lynch, and I loved it so much. What did you guys think of that complete weirdness of that episode? And getting to White Rose again, which obviously that's always good.
I completely just felt like that scene hit everything perfect. It was perfect on every level. It was perfectly shot. It was perfectly acted. There was just enough tension and confusion. There was almost kind of a Stanley Kubrick sort of vibe to it. Especially with the fish tank, the bright fish tank in the background, and the red phone, and then B.D. Wong. I cannot say enough about how fantastic B.D. Wong was in that scene, and it really, I thought, brought out the best in Portia Doubleday. I really felt like it was the best she's ever been. This episode was a great kind of arc for her. I think it would be a great Emmy submission because she just has some fantastic scenes with a lot of range and a lot of impact to play. It worked on every level for me.
Well, I'm happy for you, Tony. I can't say the same for myself. I feel like I've seen a lot of shows in recent years where they have characters kind of acting a certain way that can only happen on television, and ultimately it doesn't really go anywhere. They get asked these obscure questions that you think might mean something, but really it was just to be weird, and that's the sense that I got from this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with, I half agree with Riley and half agree with Tony. The first half of Angela's story I thought was really strange, and I was having really bad flashbacks to the last season of American Horror Story with the little children dressed in the garb of the vampire kids. I was getting like very, very upset remembering that horrible season. But as soon as she left and B.D. Wong came into the room and we started getting a little bit more sense of why she was here, and just the dialogue between the two of them, I thought that scene was terrific. Everything else was a little bit too strange for my taste and alienating, but once B.D. Wong came into the scene, I thought that was terrific.
And then we also got another portion of this story was Agent DePiro again. After the shooting, we don't know where Darlene is right now. We don't know where Cisco is right now, I don't think. We just know that there was a shooting, people are dead, and DePiro is traumatized and covered in blood. She has the scene with her boss, which is solid. She's trying to do more, and he's kind of like given up, like this is bigger than us now. The scene that really stood out for me was the scene in her bedroom, where I joked about the product placement of the Amazon Echo Alexa device in an earlier episode. It was used so well this time for actual character development, so that not only did I forgive the product placement, but I loved the product placement, and I kind of want one now. In addition to Grace Gummer giving a really, really outstanding, lonely, sad, desperate performance there. What did you guys think of her segment of the storyline this week?
I'll go. I will not fault anything you just said. the way she played it so stilly. I mean, just with that one close up of her lying on the bed and almost not moving at all. It was such a still performance, and yet it spoke volumes. I felt like this was her best episode. And there were little touches, and the questions she was asking. It was almost kind of like the incredibly darker, bleaker side of what was that movie? Her. Yeah, I thought it was like this weird, dark, different version of that, and Grace Gummer just completely knocked it out of the park. She was more sympathetic, more vulnerable, and yet was still that same hard-edged character. Still managed to be vulnerable and still maintain. She didn't resort to histrionics. That scene really surprised me because I thought, oh God, here comes the Alexa again, and wow, so just brilliantly shot and done. Bravo, Grace Gummer.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about her season arc when I was watching this episode because a lot of it is so typical in the sense that, okay, she is like an underling at the FBI. She knows more than her boss. She's putting pieces together. Nobody listens to her. Something goes wrong. She says, I told you so. They say, well, yeah, I guess. Like, it could be so rote, but what she brings to the role and her stoicism, but her the small cracks in the veneer, really elevates the material. So I think the last few episodes for her have been particularly great. I missed the recap for last week's episode, but wow, was she just great in those last few moments of last week's episode too. You just really root for her character as she's putting pieces together, and you know that she's smarter than everybody else on her team and in the room.
I feel like there are a couple ways to build suspense in television. You can have like actually exciting content, or you can just kind of withhold things, which I feel is what this show is doing. Like last week, we had a lot of interesting developments where Dom was tracking Darlene and Elliot was tracking Tyrell, and Angela was, maybe getting abducted. But then instead of picking up with those threads this week, you just kind of had, Dom talking to her phone and Angela sitting in a room answering weird questions. So I was not a fan. I just wanted the show to get back to the things that I cared about.
But you got to have character development. And what was great about that, there was a couple of really interesting touches in that scene because I thought it really brought Dom full circle as a character. Because I don't just want the procedural aspect. I don't just want her following. I want to see, what led to, some of the ways that she handled the case, like we talked about last week. Her short temper with the nurse and just the way she followed that through. And to me, that showed, we had seen hints in the earlier episodes about the fact of her, not sleeping and, the way she drinks coffee and, this kind of weird, almost OCD quality that she has. And to see her actually vulnerable, to me, made her more of a full character rather than just a type, rather than just the dogged investigator. And to me, that's what elevated it, is that I now feel like we have a larger picture, that there's some real damage with her. That we got hints at earlier that maybe we hadn't had. And I thought one of the other interesting little tidbits, I thought it was almost a throwaway line, when Santiago was leaving the hospital room and telling Dom to go home, and she says, I'm doing the interview, and he says, it can wait a few hours. Who is she going to interview? Who is she going to talk to? Is she going to talk to the press, or is she going to talk to somebody that maybe was at the restaurant? Could it be Darlene? Could it be Cisco? I just thought that was a really interesting little thing that they just dropped there.
I hadn't actually thought of that. That is a good question, and she's going back for a few, I guess going back to her own apartment, and that's where she's going to spend those few hours. I'm guessing we will find that out next week. But what I love about this character, the Dom character, it does feel like an interesting and nice counterpoint to Elliot, in the sense that the whole show has been built around Elliot, who has this sort of fractured psyche, mental illness, which I don't know if if it's an accurate portrayal of any particular mental illness, but there seems to be some dissociative identity and schizophrenia possibly in there. And then you've got Dom, who, when we first saw her sleepless nights before and now this week, I really do think she's probably suffering from some degree of depression. And depression completely, individual of, separate from what she's doing at this time, but certainly exacerbated by it. So I really do like seeing that kind of flip side where, okay, Elliot is trying to change the world despite his mental illness, or in some ways through it and because of it, and she's trying to do it in her own way on the other end. So I really do like that counterpoint, because they haven't really been too specific with her. The most specific backstory we got with her was when she was with White Rose in China a few episodes ago. But I really do like seeing this side of her. And speaking of White Rose again, just going back to that scene a little bit, what I loved about that meeting was like White Rose's kind of confusion, like the way she regards Angela, where it's just like, what is this creature who keeps showing up? Because she has these weirdly close ties with Phil Price. She has these weirdly close ties with Elliot, and we know these are two hugely important pieces of White Rose's puzzle, and yet this blonde girl keeps showing up, and she's talking to other organizations, and she's involved in ways that, like, who are you? She gave her 29 minutes. That's, knowing White Rose, that's incredibly generous. That's more than she gave Elliot the first time they met. So we don't necessarily know kind of the intervening moments between that meeting and when she's in that car. She's kind of in sort of, it looked like almost Angela was in a trance, saying, please forget the phone call. I mean, and just sort of in this really kind of dead voice, kind of calm, what the intervening moments between there was and what part she plays in it next. I think that's another issue, is that the direction of the Angela character has been kind of all over the place at times, and now maybe she will be an actually specific cog in the wheel this time. Do you guys think that we're going to get more specific direct involvement from Angela, or is she just going to keep kind of bouncing around plot points?
She's done a lot of bouncing so far, so I
thought what was really interesting about that scene between White Rose and Angela was, I thought she really kind of hit Angela's personality on the nail, because I think throughout this whole season, when, yes, there's been some, frustration with the perception of Angela just kind of bouncing around and not having much purpose. But I think what White Rose picks up on is Angela's absolute naivete, how naive she is that, oh, one person can change the world. And when she says, and B.D. Wong delivered it, I mean, his performance in that scene was both strangely tender and yet threatening at the same time, which I was like, wow, those are two really hard things to play and have them register so well. But when he says, I don't want your proof, I want your belief. In other words, I want, and which that line could be interpreted two ways. I want your belief, like maybe White Rose is saying, I wish I had your sense of belief and optimism, or at the same time, I want to take that belief from you and have you realize, ooh, you are not in charge. One person, kind of shattering her fantasy that she's in control of anything, which Angela ultimately admits at the end of that speech.
This was B.D. Wong's 4th appearance in the season, and assuming that he appears next week, that'll be 5 out of 12 episodes. So he'll still be eligible for a guest actor at the Emmys.
And thank goodness. I mean, he missed out this time, but I mean, given the increased screen time, um, I think his profile will be a little higher next year. So fingers crossed. Although it's the season coming this early in the next Emmy cycle, it's really hard to say what's going to happen, what other shows are going to rise up, and we've got all of that available real estate with Game of Thrones taking the Emmy cycle off. So it will be really interesting to see where people. Maybe he will be Max von Sydow's spot. I'm hoping for that. And because he's been absolutely fantastic. And I've talked with Tony about another actor who's been fantastic, who would be in the supporting race, and that's Michael Christopher. And we got another scene of him trying to control everything, as his sort of megalomania doctrine that he delivered last week. He's sort of kind of following it through now, where it's going like, oh, Evil Corp has this, currency that we've created. Let's just use that as the national currency for a while. Which is, it's hard. The hard part to tell is not whether, it's, part of his larger plan. Obviously it is. But is that part of White Rose's larger plan, or is he still kind of going rogue? That's the interesting question I find myself asking in the middle of that scene. What did you guys think of him in that scene and his intentions overall?
I think it is supposed to demonstrate him still deviating from his instruction, because they, in the previously on, they clipped that scene of White Rose saying, oh, so he's still thinking of the ecoin strategy from, I think, White Rose's first appearance in this season. So I think it's supposed to be that he's still not doing exactly what he's supposed to do. I want to know how it fits into, of course they're not going to tell us for probably at least another season, but I want to really know how what he's doing fits into the larger picture. I just want a little bit more clarity. Like, it would be nice for some pieces to start coming together. Like, they can give us some answers while also creating new questions, instead of just, kind of to Riley's point, delaying giving us like even a nibble of something. Like, I want to know a little bit more.
I really think that the confusion lies in the fact that this was originally supposed to be, a two-part episode that aired in the same night, and something changed in the post Mr. Robot. I think it's called Hacking Mr. Robot, the one that they do. It's kind of like their version of The Talking Dead or something like that. The after show that they do. The host made reference to, Sam Esmail's probably. We wanted to get Sam Esmail's take, but he's probably still editing. I'm wondering if there was some discussions or something that he wanted to get out of it. But I will say that the thing about Michael Christopher is, again, he can take a scene and with so little screen time, he's had just 2 scenes in the last 2 episodes, and I think he only had maybe the 1 scene with White Rose in the previous episode before that, which I really think is where the fracture in Bryce's plans and White Rose's plans really started to develop. But in those just short scenes, he just dominates the scene in a way that is terrifying and yet strangely cordial. I mean, like, he took down whoever that guy was supposed to be, like a Treasury Secretary or whoever it was. He took him down and yet kind of had a smile on his face the whole time. And yet just demolished him with like, oh, did you ever really think I cared about you? You silly man. And, Michael Christopher is not an actor who he's primarily known as a playwright. He has a Tony Award for writing plays. And I would love to see more of him acting, because he's spectacular.
His scenes with BD Wong, I'm thinking would have been a really great submission under like the old Emmy system that we had 10 years ago, where the guests, if they were in under 6 episodes, like that's the only way they could submit, and then they would just submit a reel that was all their scenes all edited together. So BD Wong's would just be like monologue after monologue after monologue. So that's too bad.
How many has Michael Christopher been in this season? He's been in more than 6, I assume.
I would assume, but yeah.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
think Daniel has the IMDb open.
Yeah, I'm looking up his name. And this is how we found out about Peter McNichols. So this may be low tech, but it gets the job done. Just ask Peter Scolari.
Yeah, Riley, have you gotten a fruit basket from Peter Scolari yet?
I have not.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
Okay,
10.
so he's supporting.
Yeah, for sure.
He has been at least a little bit in almost every, if not every episode, I think.
And going back to something that Riley was saying, Daniel and I talked about this with Carly Chaikin. The old system of the supporting actors, where they used to create a reel of just their scenes from 2 episodes, would really benefit Christopher, because he had a much longer scene. He might have a much longer set of scenes, I think, in episode 5 with Angela. And then contrast that with either, the speech, the confrontation with White Rose a couple of weeks ago, or any of these. He'd be a force to be reckoned with if episodes mattered.
Yeah, I'm just imagining the dream Emmy reel. I mean, this is why I sort of lament this system so much, is the idea that you could get that Michael Christopher scene from 2 weeks ago, for instance, where he's delivering the speech on megalomania, and combine that with his confrontation with White Rose, and if he were guest, for instance, and then combine that with just having all the little pieces that he's been in, and seeing them all together, and seeing the impact he's had on the season, just from a scene in an episode. I feel like he's in half the episode whenever he's just in one scene, in a good way. He has that kind of a presence and an impact on me as a viewer. Oh my goodness, he'd be winning such an Emmy somewhere. It would be so much fun to watch that happen. It would be like, where did this guy come from, in a Željko Ivanek kind of way, where it's like, oh yeah, did you see that episode? Yep, give him the Emmy right now. And so I really do kind of. We'll see on Sunday night what happens at these Emmys. I really do think that with Margot Martindale winning again for a 1.5-minute episode or performance, depending on the winners we see this weekend, if there are some kind of eyebrow raisers, if there might be some more tweaking to this system, and maybe not necessarily a complete rollback, but a way to make the episodes a more central part of it again, because we are really missing out on, we will be missing out on great performances like these that might fly under the radar. But if you would just watch them, they're gonna, these are gonna be, could be your upset Emmy winners, for years to come. So I really do hope we see that.
And Michael Christopher also has a Pulitzer as well.
Oh wow. Yeah, the Emmys I find have been going in kind of a weird direction the last few years, but they are very responsive still to what people think of their system, and they're always changing things every year. So I'm expecting something big to change after the second Martindale win.
The only thing I'm concerned about, speaking of the Emmys and the season of Mr. Robot, I feel like all of the great material has been in the second half, and all the episodes about are in the second half. And if there were, let's say, voters who watched the first season either when it aired or were watching the FYC DVDs they got for the Emmys, and then tuned into the second season and totally gave up on the kind of up and down first 5 or 6 episodes, they might not see these great performances or think anything of them because the first half was so rocky, and it might drop in a lot of categories. So that's kind of what I'm afraid of, because the second half of this season has been excellent. I've been really pleased. The first half was not so great, and I feel like a lot of people maybe stopped watching.
Yeah, which is why we're here, because obviously every single one of our viewers is a member of the Television Academy. I haven't done the demographics of this, but I'm relatively confident 100% are voting members of the Television Academy. So any of them who are watching these and not watching the show, which actually does happen from time to time. There have been shows that I've lost faith on, but I enjoy a recap so much that I keep reading the recaps. That happened with American Idol for a while, actually. But yeah, so we're here to let you know. Watch some late episodes. Watch for Michael Christopher. Watch for Carly Chaikin. Watch for a lot of these really strong episodes in terms of storytelling and direction and editing, cinematography, all of these different fields, even the ones you didn't nominate it for this year. Fix that, and hopefully we'll see it in some categories next year, if not all of them. With one more episode to go, and I think I discussed this a little bit with Tony. What is the one thing, more than anything else, that you feel like you must have answered or at least addressed in order for you to feel like this season has been at least satisfactory in terms of storytelling?
Where has Terrell been? I need to know that. I'm not even sure I need to know what Phase 2 is yet, because it seems like they're kind of intertwined, because when Wellick came back, he said, Phase 2 is almost ready, and, you're going to be really happy with what it is. I thought that was a really, nice little morsel. So the two are certainly interconnected, but I feel like that is the number one thing.
Yeah, I agree with Tony. I don't feel like I need Phase 2 right now, because I don't think the show has been building to something like huge and explosive in the finale. But we have been waiting all season long to find out where Tyrell has been. I do wonder with Martin Wallstrom's voice is, although it might be a conscious decision, I think it could just as easily be, he's been gone for so long, he forgot how he portrayed the character before. I mean, I remember back when I was watching Lost, where you had Naveen Andrews and Henry Ian Cusick. They both picked up Emmy nominations early on, and they had kind of specific accents that were not true for the real-life actors. And then as the show went on, and maybe they would disappear for a number of episodes and come back, their accents changed over time. And this could be the same situation.
I don't know if there's anything I necessarily need, but I would really like to see them kind of illustrate or maybe foretell a narrative path that they're really going to drive on next season. Like, I feel like we kind of had that at the end of season 1. They didn't really stick to it. Like, we didn't really get a lot of the fallout from what they did in season 1. Kind of more on the characters, not so much grand scale. But I just wish that they would lay out kind of something that we know that they're going to be driving towards and addressing in season 3. So I guess maybe that speaks to more of maybe more of a cohesive and attentive plot narrative.
Yeah, the sad thing to me is that, if you took the first half of the season and the second half of the season, they almost seem like completely different shows. And I think that might have been somewhat jarring for viewers and would probably have something to do with why the viewership fell off. Whereas I think that if they maybe had either interspersed some of these stories a little bit better, or paced them out differently, or even just cut down that whole Elliot arc by just a little bit, the show would have felt tighter. But I think the last half of the season has been stellar.
I think you're almost being too kind, Tony. I was thinking about this today.
I'm never too kind.
I don't even see what was the point of giving us like 6 episodes of this whole ruse about Elliot like the fabrication of him being at his mother's house and this whole like parallel universe for him when he's really in prison. It would have been a more successful season if they opened the season with him being picked up at his door and going to prison and just playing it straight. I would have been so much more satisfied, because I don't see that whole kind of construct gave us much of anything other than it was like a gimmick that they thought would really pull something over on their viewers, which kind of did to me in a way, but I don't feel satisfied by it because it's not impacting what's happening in the second half.
Yeah, I actually agree with that.
Yeah, I do too.
The problem with the prison storyline in hindsight is that since he's been out of prison, and I think the episodes since he's been out of prison most of them have been some of the best of the season, but that first half of the season becomes kind of tainted since that prison storyline hasn't really had any meaningful effect on what's come after. He just got out of prison and kept, his relationship with Mr. Robot is a little fractured. Well, we knew that already. He's trying to pick up where he left off with Stage 2, which he doesn't remember, which he didn't remember already. So nothing that really happened in the prison with Craig Robinson, with the cyber black market website thing and all that stuff that hasn't really connected. And at this point, I wouldn't really expect it to. So it really did seem like more of a delaying tactic. I really agree that. Honestly, actually looking back, and you don't need to cut 2 whole episodes, but I think if you cut 2 episodes worth of that storyline out, it would have been tighter and it would have been leaner and it would have gotten us where we wanted to really be faster. I do agree, and I said it when that reveal came out that it's just like, okay, you think you pulled one over on us, and that just feels like it. I thought it was an anticlimax when it was revealed. So yeah, I don't even know if I want them to connect it at this point, because it would just be another complication we don't need.
Well, even the trace of what they tried to do this week, I think there was a line where in the narration, Elliot's like, well, maybe Ray was right. And I was like, who cares about Ray? Like, it's over. Like what do you, like, what's the point? I'm sorry. I don't know. It just, unless anything from those pieces are going to come back in a significant way, or those characters in the next part, like, let's just leave it where it was and move on.
Nice experiment.
Yeah. I feel that Elliot hasn't been properly serviced this season, which is kind of strange since he is, the lead of the show. But I mean, after we got that reveal, he was gone for an entire episode. And then since then, he's been very passive and he has no idea what's going on. So he's not really doing anything. He's just kind of watching and seeing what he can pick up. And then in this last episode, he's gone for a 32-minute stretch, which is even longer than the 23-minute stretch that he's gone in the premiere. So I don't know.
Yeah, and
I'm not.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that it would be explained because we'd have more of him in the second half. And then I found out there was no second half this week, and I have to wait a week. And then it's like, well, as a standalone, it's like that was disappointing. I don't know. That I really think, to all your points, the splitting of the 2-hour finale into 2 weeks was really disappointing and kind of made things in hindsight look not as strong.
It's interesting about Elliot in terms of his activity level this season. I listened to a writing podcast called Writing Excuses, which is advice for writers and tools and techniques for fiction writers. And one of the things that they've talked about that stuck with me is that there are these 3 levers for character development or character likability, sort of, that you can adjust up and down. And it's likability, competence, and proactivity. So if all those dials are too high, then you have kind of a Mary Sue who's just good at everything. But in terms of Elliot, his proactivity is really low because he's really been more reactive than active and sort of passive and trying to figure out what his alter ego is doing and what everyone else is doing and what he was doing in those parts of his brain that he's blacked out. So he hasn't really been a driving force in the story, and that has brought his competence bar down really low. I mean, we know he's still a good hacker, but those parts of his brain that are really great at hacking are kind of on the fritz because a lot of that is the Mr. Robot persona, and that's kind of haywire. And so, I guess that leaves us with likability, and I guess he's still kind of likable, but he's so inscrutable and so distant by design that bar gets kind of low too. So you have a character who's really not operating really high on any of those fields, and you've got all these other characters who really are. You've got Darlene has been really proactive, and you've got Philip Price is very proactive, even though he's not likable, and he's super competent. So you got these other characters who really feel like they're driving the show in a way that I feel like Elliot should, much more so next season.
And that kind of fits into the narrative of he was in prison for half of the season and he can't do anything or he can do very little from prison. But now that he's out, like, why isn't he doing more? Why is he still struggling with? I don't know. Like, we should be back to the old Elliot a bit, maybe a changed Elliot because of his experience and his understanding of his, his condition and how to deal with Mr. Robot. But he's still he's still not doing anything, or very little.
The weird part this week was that Carly Chaikin has been picking up a lot of the slack lately, but this was the first episode of the series that she missed.
She loses her perfect attendance award.
I have a feeling that'll be rectified by next week.
It better be. I mean, with that shooting in the diner, if they don't tell us where she is or what happened to her, I mean, I'm almost certain, she is in FBI custody or something, something concrete. She probably is the person who will be interviewed next week. But yeah, and it's weird because this week I thought we almost got that Elliot proactivity level up when he says, okay, I'm going to do this lucid dreaming thing, which is a concept I have loved ever since the episode of Ed about a decade ago, Captain Lucidity. Such a great show, such a great episode. Deep cut, but everyone, if you don't remember that show or didn't watch that show, go find it and watch it. It was amazing. But anyway, the lucid dream, what was great about that in terms of his proactivity, it's him deciding to do something. It's him, okay, now I'm going to track Mr. Robot. Now I'm going to figure out what he's doing. He has a plan. He's going to execute it. And then he gets to that cab, and he's like, where am I? Where am I going? And then Wellick gets in the car and goes like, is he really here? And it's completely back to passive. And so yeah, I think next week one of the major tweaks I would like to see is to see Elliot. I mean, you can't have Elliot 2 together because that's just not his character. It wouldn't really work. But you need to have him either confident enough or reckless enough to really make more story-driving decisions in a forward direction. Because clearly he's made a lot of these decisions already. He's the architect of Stage 2, and he just doesn't know it. So now we need the Elliot back who, for better or worse in terms of all the other lives of the other characters, who is actually making forward momentum and generating story instead of kind of being a passenger on his own ship. So is there...
I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Well, I do too. Fingers crossed for next week's episode. It will be interesting because this episode was, even though it was, we originally expected it to be airing in all in one night, it was still a fairly long installment. So if they had aired together, I wonder how long the night would have been, like 2.5 hours possibly. So
we'd still be watching it now.
So fingers crossed for that. Part 2 of the season finale, Python. Fingers crossed for that. Thank you, Tony, Riley, and David for joining me, and thank everyone for watching. We'll see you next week.
And there's a post-credit scene next week.
Oh, awesome! I will remember to. I will remember to stick around for that. Stick around for after the credits.
Awesome. Yeah.
Is it Nick Fury? Nick Fury is going to come in and recruit. Okay, so stick around for after the credits next week. Look for Nick Fury, and we will see you next week.
And Alf.
And Alf. Oh, yes, of course, Alf. The one question that remains is Alf. And, of course, the last word of this recap will be Alf.